In my 32 years as a firefighter in Calgary, I thought I'd seen every kind of emergency a person could face. House fires that consumed everything a family owned, car wrecks that left survivors wondering why they'd been spared, industrial accidents that haunted me for weeks afterward. But nothing in all those years prepared me for the call I received at 1:30 in the morning on a Tuesday in late November. "Uncle Bill, please, I need you." My nephew Connor's voice was barely recognizable, choked with pain and something else I couldn't immediately identify. "Please come to the Foothills Medical Center. I'm in emergency. I don't know what to do." I was already out of bed, reaching for the clothes I'd laid out of habit on my dresser chair. Connor was 15, a quiet kid who'd inherited his father's love of hockey and his mother's stubborn independence. In all the years I'd watched him grow up, I'd never heard him sound so small, so desperate. "What happened, son? Are you hurt?" I kept my voice steady, the same calm tone I'd used 1,000 times when talking to people trapped in burning buildings or pinned inside crushed vehicles. "It's going to be okay. Just tell me what's going on." "My stepfather says I fell off my bike." "But Uncle Bill, that's not what happened. He grabbed me and threw me against the garage wall. My wrist is broken, and they're asking questions, and Mom keeps telling them I'm reckless, that I'm always getting hurt, and nobody's listening to me." I felt ice form in my chest. "Connor, listen carefully. I'm leaving right now. I'll be there in 20 minutes. "Which department?" "Emergency, Bay 12. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Uncle Bill, Mom wants to take me home as soon as they're done with the cast, but I can't go back there. Not tonight. Not with him." The drive from my house in Kensington to Foothills Medical Center usually took about 15 minutes. I made it in 12, my mind racing the entire way. My sister Karen had remarried 3 years ago to Derek Ashton, a regional manager for a national insurance company. He'd seemed decent enough when I first met him at a family barbecue. Good job, nice car, the kind of confident handshake that successful businessmen cultivate. Karen had been alone for 5 years after her first husband, my brother-in-law Michael, died suddenly from an aneurysm. She'd struggled with the grief, with raising Connor by herself, with the loneliness that seemed to swallow her whole some days. When Derek came along, I'd been relieved. Karen seemed happier than she'd been in years. Connor had seemed cautiously accepting of the new man in their lives. Apparently, I'd missed something important. The emergency department at Foothills was busy for a weeknight, but I knew my way around. 3 decades of bringing accident victims and fire survivors through these doors had made me familiar with every corridor. The triage nurse, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes, looked up as I approached. "I'm here for Connor Mitchell, Bay 12. I'm his uncle, Bill Morrison." She checked her screen, then gave me a careful look that immediately put me on alert. In my experience, medical staff only got that guarded expression when something wasn't sitting right with them. "He's with his mother and stepfather. The doctor should be finishing the casting soon." I'm also a retired firefighter. 32 years with Calgary Fire Department, most of them as a captain. Connor called me specifically, asked me to come. Something shifted in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or relief. "Bay 12 is down the hall on your left. Dr. Gwen is the attending physician. She's been very thorough with her examination." I thanked her and headed toward the bay, turning over that phrase in my mind. Very thorough. When emergency doctors are very thorough, it usually means they've noticed something that doesn't add up. The curtain to Bay 12 was partially drawn. I could see Connor sitting on the examination bed, his face pale under the harsh fluorescent lights, his left wrist being wrapped in a blue fiberglass cast by a technician. Karen stood beside him, arms crossed, her expression a mixture of concern and something that looked like defensiveness. Derek Ashton stood near the doorway, checking his phone with the air of a man who had somewhere more important to be. It was Connor's face when he saw me that confirmed everything. Relief flooded his features so completely that tears spilled down his cheeks before he could stop them. "Uncle Bill." His voice cracked on my name. "Hey, bud." I stepped into the bay, nodding at Karen. "Got your call. Wanted to make sure you were okay." "Bill, you didn't need to come all the way out here." Karen's smile was tight. It was just a bike accident. Connor took a spill in the garage. You know how he is, always going too fast. I looked at Derek, who had finally put away his phone. He met my eyes with a calm, measured expression that immediately set off alarm bells. Bill, he extended his hand. Sorry you had to come out at this hour. Kids, right? Always finding new ways to give us heart attacks. His handshake was firm, confident. The handshake of a man who was used to being believed. I turned my attention to Connor, really looking at him. The cast on his wrist. The way he was hunched slightly to one side, favoring his right shoulder. The redness around his eyes that went beyond simple pain. So you fell off your bike, I said conversationally. In the garage? Connor hesitated. Derek answered for him. That's right. He was trying to get his bike down from the wall mount and lost his balance. Landed hard on the concrete floor. Lucky it's just the wrist. I nodded slowly, doing the mental calculations I'd learned from years of accident investigation. A fall from a wall-mounted bike would typically result in certain injury patterns. What I was seeing didn't quite match. Before I could ask another question, the curtain pulled aside, and a woman in her late 30s entered, tablet in hand. Her name tag read Dr. Sarah Nguyen, Emergency Medicine. Mr. Morrison. She acknowledged me with a brief nod, then turned to Connor. Okay, Connor, the cast is done. You're going to need to keep that wrist immobilized for at least 6 weeks. No hockey, no contact sports. I'll give you a referral to an orthopedic specialist for a follow-up in 2 weeks. See? Not too serious. Derek's voice held a note of relief that seemed slightly overdone. Can we take him home now? It's late and we've all got work and school tomorrow? Dr. Nguyen's expression remained professionally neutral. Actually, I'd like to speak with Connor's mother and stepfather for a moment, privately. She glanced at me. Mr. Morrison, would you mind staying with Connor while we talk? Karen looked like she wanted to protest, but Derek put a hand on her arm and guided her toward a small consultation room down the hall. I watched them go, noting the way Derek's fingers pressed into Karen's elbow, the way she leaned slightly away from the pressure without seeming to realize she was doing it. What's going on? I asked Dr. Nguyen quietly. She lowered her voice. The injury pattern is inconsistent with the stated mechanism. A fall from a bike mount onto concrete would typically show different fracture characteristics. Connor's wrist fracture shows torsional force, like someone grabbed and twisted. And the bruising on his shoulder and upper arm, she paused. It looks like grip marks. My gut tightened. You think someone hurt him? I think the story doesn't match the evidence. But his mother is insisting it was an accident, and Connor won't contradict her with them in the room. Dr. Nguyen met my eyes. I've documented everything thoroughly. Photographs, detailed notes, but without the patient or guardian confirming abuse, my options are limited. I pulled a chair over and sat down across from Connor. The casting technician had finished and quietly left, giving us privacy. Connor, your mom and Derek are in another room. Doctor, Nguyen and I are here because we want to help you. But you need to tell us what really happened tonight. For a long moment, he didn't speak. His good hand plucked at the edge of the hospital blanket, a nervous habit I remembered from when he was a small child. We were arguing, he finally said. Derek and me, about Christmas break. I wanted to go on the school ski trip to Banff, but Derek said it was too expensive and I needed to learn that money doesn't grow on trees. His voice wavered. I said that my real dad would have let me go, that my real dad actually cared about what I wanted. And then he grabbed my arm, hard. I tried to pull away, and he twisted my wrist and shoved me into the wall. Connor's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Then he picked up my bike and threw it at me. That's how I hit the floor. And when Mom came out to see what was happening, he told her I'd been trying to get my bike down and fell. Dr. Nguyen was making notes on her tablet. Did he threaten you afterward? Connor nodded. In the car on the way here. He said if I told anyone what really happened, he'd make sure I never went on any school trips ever again. That he'd tell everyone I was a problem kid, a liar. That people would believe him over some mouthy teenager. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture I didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. Has this happened before? Connor hesitated, then nodded again. Not this bad. But he's shoved me around before, grabbed me, cornered me in my room, and yelled in my face about how ungrateful I am, how much he's sacrificed for me and Mom. He paused. And one time, about 6 months ago, he slapped me. Across the face. Left a mark. Did you tell your mother? I tried. Connor's expression was bleak. She said I was probably exaggerating. That Derek just had a different parenting style than my real dad. That I needed to try harder to get along with him because he made her happy. I felt a complex mix of emotions. Anger at Derek, frustration with Karen, and a protective fury toward this kid who'd been failed by the adults who should have kept him safe. Okay, I said. Here's what's going to happen. Dr. Nguyen has documented everything. That's important evidence. But we need to be smart about how we handle this. Your stepfather sounds like he's good at making himself look like the reasonable one, so we need to do this properly. What if Mom makes me go home with them? Connor's voice was small. What if he finds out I told you? You're not going home with them tonight. I looked at Dr. Nguyen. What are my options here? Given the nature of his injuries and the concerns raised, I can justify keeping him overnight for observation. Pain management, monitoring for compartment syndrome with the fracture. It's medically defensible. No. Connor's voice was sharp, with sudden panic. If you call the police or child services, Derek will know I talked. He'll find a way to make everyone think I'm lying. He knows people. Important people. His company handles insurance for half the businesses in this city. I exchanged a glance with Dr. Nguyen. The kid had a point. If Derek Ashton was as well connected as Connor suggested, we needed to be strategic. Then we handle this differently, I said. Connor, you're going to come stay with me for a few days, just until we figure out the right approach. We'll tell your mother you're upset about the accident, that you want some space, which is true. That buys us time without putting Derek on the defensive. She won't agree, Connor said. She will if I handle it right. I found Karen and Derek in the consultation room. My sister looked exhausted, stress evident in the tightness around her eyes. Derek's expression was carefully neutral, but I caught a flash of something hard in his gaze when he saw me. What did Connor tell you? Derek asked, before I could speak. That he's embarrassed about the accident, and he'd like to stay with me for a few days while his wrist heals. I kept my tone casual. You know how teenagers are. They don't want their mothers fussing over them when they're hurt. Karen's face softened. Bill, that's really not necessary. I can take care of him. I know you can. But remember, I've got 30 years of experience with injuries. Fire rescues, you know. I can make sure he's doing his exercises properly, managing his pain, keeping that cast dry. And honestly, Karen, you look exhausted. Let me take some of the burden for a few days. I could see her wavering. Derek, however, was studying me with sharp, calculating eyes. That's generous, Bill. But I think Connor should be at home. He's had an accident and his mother should be the one looking after him. Derek, honey. Karen touched his arm. Maybe it would be good. Connor's been so moody lately, and he and Bill have always been close. Having that uncle time might help settle him down. The way Derek's jaw tightened told me everything I needed to know about how he felt when Karen disagreed with him. But he recovered quickly, producing a smile. Of course, if that's what you think is best. Though I hope Connor appreciates how understanding we're being, considering this was his own carelessness that caused the accident. The casual cruelty of that comment, the subtle blame, made my hands curl into fists at my sides. But I kept my expression neutral. Great, then it's settled. I'll take Connor home tonight, get him comfortable. Karen, I'll text you updates, okay? My sister hugged me, and I felt the tension in her shoulders. Thank you, Bill. You're always there for us. If only you knew, I thought. But I just squeezed her shoulder and smiled. Getting Connor discharged took another 45 minutes. Derek left before the paperwork was finished, claiming an early meeting. Karen stayed, fussing over Connor with the kind of anxious attention that made him tense up and avoid her eyes. Finally, we were in my truck, driving through the dark Calgary streets toward my house in Kensington. Thank you, Connor said quietly. I didn't know what else to do. You were the only person I could think of who might actually believe me. You did exactly the right thing. I glanced at him. And we're going to figure this out. But Connor, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about getting you away from Derek for a few days. If what you've told me is true, we need to address this properly. Your mother needs to understand what's happening. She won't believe it, Connor said flatly. She never does. Maybe not at first, but we'll find a way to make her see. My house was a modest split level that I'd bought 25 years ago, back when Calgary real estate was still reasonable on a firefighter's salary. I got Connor settled in the guest room, gave him his pain medication, and watched him drift off to sleep, his face finally relaxing from the tension that had been there since the hospital. Then I sat in my living room with a cup of coffee and started thinking. First rule of fire investigation: gather all the evidence before drawing conclusions. Second rule: document everything meticulously. I pulled out my laptop and started making notes. Times, statements, observations, everything Connor had told me, everything Dr. Nguyen had documented. My own assessment of the injury pattern versus the claimed accident. Then I started researching Derek Ashton. What I found was impressive on the surface. 15 years in insurance, currently a regional manager for Northland Financial Services. His LinkedIn profile showed steady career advancement, community involvement with several Calgary charities, golf club membership, board position at a local business association. His social media presented the image of a successful, community-minded professional. But there were gaps, too. He'd moved to Calgary from Edmonton 7 years ago. His employment history before that got murky. And when I dug deeper into public records, I found something interesting. Derek Ashton had been married before, in Edmonton. The marriage had ended in divorce 9 years ago. Finding his ex-wife wasn't difficult. Michelle Ashton, now Michelle Reeves, had moved to Victoria after the divorce. Her professional profile as an accountant was public. She looked like she'd rebuilt her life. I debated for about 30 seconds, then decided that Connor's safety was more important than awkwardness. I drafted a careful email. Miss Reeves, my name is Bill Morrison. I'm a retired fire captain in Calgary. I apologize for the unusual contact, but I'm writing regarding Derek Ashton, who I understand was your former husband. He's now married to my sister, and there have been some concerning incidents involving my teenage nephew. I'm not asking you to violate any privacy, but if you're willing to share any information that might be relevant to a child's safety, I would be grateful. You can reach me at this number. I sent it before I could second-guess myself. By the time Connor woke up around noon the next day, groggy and in pain, I'd compiled a file on Derek Ashton that was starting to paint a troubling picture. "How are you feeling?" I asked, handing him a glass of water and his medication. "Like garbage." He swallowed the pills, then looked at me. "What happens now?" "Now we build a case, carefully and properly, because you're right that Derek is good at looking like the reasonable one. So, we need evidence that can't be dismissed as a teenager being dramatic." "What kind of evidence?" "The kind that shows a pattern. One incident might be explained away, but if we can demonstrate that this is ongoing behavior, it becomes harder to ignore." Connor spent the next 2 hours telling me everything. It had started small. Criticism about Connor's grades, even though he was a solid B-plus student. Comments about his friends being bad influences. Increasing control over household decisions, what they ate for dinner, what shows they watched, when Connor could go out. Then it escalated. A shove during an argument 8 months ago. His arm gripped hard enough to leave bruises 5 months ago. Verbal threats about what would happen if Connor caused problems for Derek and Karen's marriage. "Have you noticed him being controlling or aggressive with your mom?" I asked. Connor hesitated. "Not physically, but he's always monitoring her phone, asking who she's texting, who she's talking to. She used to meet her friends for dinner once a month, but Derek always found reasons why it wasn't convenient. Now she barely sees anyone outside of work." Classic isolation tactics. Subtle enough that the victim often doesn't recognize what's happening until they're cut off from everyone who might help them. My phone buzzed with a call from a Victoria area code. "Is this Bill Morrison?" A woman's voice, cautious. "Speaking. This is Michelle Reeves. I got your email about Derek." There was a pause. "You mentioned a child's safety. What happened? I gave her a careful summary. When I finished, there was a long silence. Okay, she said finally. I'm going to tell you some things, and I need you to understand that I have no proof of most of it. That's why I never pursued anything legally. But maybe it will help protect your nephew. What Michelle told me over the next 20 minutes made my stomach turn. Her marriage to Derek had started well. Charming, attentive, everything she'd wanted. Then gradually it deteriorated as his need for control intensified. He'd been verbally abusive, financially controlling, and toward the end, physically intimidating, never leaving marks where anyone could see them. The final straw was my son from my first marriage, Michelle said. Tyler was 14 at the time. Derek started getting aggressive with him. Nothing I could prove. But the way he'd corner him, get in his space, threaten him when they were alone. When I confronted Derek, he denied everything and made it sound like I was being paranoid, like Tyler was manipulating me. What did you do? I left, took Tyler and got out, filed for divorce, moved to Victoria to put distance between us. Her voice hardened. Derek fought it viciously, tried to make me look unstable, unreliable, told everyone who would listen that I was using Tyler to hurt him in the divorce. He's very good at playing the victim, Bill. Very good at making himself look like the reasonable one. I'm sorry you went through that. I'm just glad we got out when we did. Tyler's 23 now, doing well, has his own life. We've both been through therapy. A pause. But the thought of Derek doing this to another kid, Bill, you need to be careful. If he feels threatened, he'll come after you. I'm a 63-year-old retired firefighter. What's he going to do? Whatever he thinks he can get away with, Michelle said quietly. Please be careful, and please protect your nephew. After we hung up, I sat with that conversation for a while. Then I called an old friend, Greg Patterson, who'd retired from the Calgary Police Service a few years ago after a career in domestic violence investigations. Bill Morrison, he said warmly when he answered. What kind of trouble are you getting into now? I need advice. Off the record. I outlined the situation. Greg listened without interrupting, then sighed. Here's the reality. Connor's 15, which means his testimony alone might not carry full weight without parental support. His mother is denying there's a problem, which complicates everything. You've got good medical documentation from the hospital, but one incident that can be explained as an accident isn't enough for intervention. So what can I do? Build the case properly. Document everything. If Derek makes any threats or attempts, contact that makes Connor uncomfortable, record it if possible. Keep Connor safe while gathering evidence. And most importantly, try to get through to your sister. If Karen acknowledges what's happening, everything else becomes easier. And if I can't, then you might have to make some hard decisions about how far you're willing to push this. The next few days settled into a routine. Connor stayed with me, going to school from my house, coming back each afternoon. I drove him, picked him up, made sure he was keeping up with his schoolwork and following the doctor's instructions for his wrist. Karen called twice a day. I kept the conversations light, reassuring her that Connor was healing well, that we were having good uncle-nephew time. She seemed relieved, actually, that she didn't have to manage Derek's moods while caring for an injured teenager. Derek didn't call at all. That worried me more than constant contact would have. On Thursday afternoon, I got a call from Dr. Nguyen. Mr. Morrison, I wanted to let you know about something. I was discussing Connor's case with a colleague, and she mentioned she'd treated another teenager about a year ago with a similar presentation. Wrist injury, bruising. Story that didn't match the injury pattern. My pulse quickened. Did this patient happen to mention who was present when the injury occurred? The stepfather brought her in. Very concerned, very involved in her care. Made sure to mention multiple times that the girl was accident-prone, that she'd had other minor injuries. Do you have a name? I can't give you that directly. Patient confidentiality. A pause. But if you were to check with the sports medicine clinic at the Rocky View, specifically their adolescent injury program from last November, you might find something useful. I understood what she was carefully not saying. Thank you, Dr. Nguyen. Mr. Morrison, whatever you're building, be thorough. If this man has hurt multiple kids, that needs to come out, but you need solid evidence. Finding records at a different hospital was more difficult, but I still had contacts from my firefighting years. A favor called in from a former colleague who now worked in hospital administration got me a name. Sophie Moreau, 14, at the time of her injury, registered with an address in the Beltline area. Her mother, Isabel Moreau, had dated Derek Ashton 2.5 years ago before he met Karen. The relationship had lasted about 7 months. I sent another careful message, this time through Isabel's work email at a downtown law firm. Miss Moreau, I apologize for the intrusive contact. My name is Bill Morrison, retired fire captain. I'm writing regarding Derek Ashton, who I believe you dated briefly. He's now married to my sister, and I'm concerned about my nephew's safety. A doctor mentioned your daughter had a similar injury to what my nephew just experienced. If you're willing to talk, I would appreciate hearing about your experience. This is about protecting kids. Isabel called me that evening. I knew something was wrong, she said without preamble. I knew it that night Sophie got hurt, but she wouldn't tell me what really happened, and Derek was so convincing with his story about her falling during a soccer practice. And Sophie never told you the truth? Not until months later, after I'd already ended things with him. Then she finally admitted that Derek had grabbed her and pushed her into a wall during an argument. She was terrified of him, but she was also terrified of what he'd do if she told anyone. How did Derek react when you broke up with him? Like flipping a switch. Suddenly I was ungrateful. I was unstable. I was going to regret choosing my difficult daughter over a good man who could have provided for us. Isabel's voice strengthened. I didn't regret it. Best decision I ever made. Would Sophie be willing to talk? Or give a statement to authorities? A long pause. She's 16 now, doing better. Therapy helped, but she's still frightened of him. Let me talk to her. See how she feels. By Friday, 6 days after Connor's injury, I had the outline of something substantial. Medical records from 2 teenagers with similar injuries, both connected to Derek Ashton. Testimony from his ex-wife about controlling and abusive behavior. Documentation of escalating aggression toward Connor. What I needed now was to try again with Karen. I invited my sister to meet me at a coffee shop in Kensington, neutral territory. She arrived looking tired, dark circles under her eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago. How's Connor? She asked immediately. He's been so withdrawn when I call. I'm worried. He's healing. The wrist is improving. Karen, I need to talk to you about something difficult. Her expression closed off immediately. If this is about Derek, Bill, I don't want to hear it. I know you've never really warmed up to him. That's not true. I barely know him. But I'm concerned about some things. Connor said something, didn't he? He's been so hostile to Derek lately. Karen's voice was tight. I don't know what's gotten into him. Karen. I kept my voice gentle but firm. Connor didn't fall off his bike. Derek grabbed him and threw him against a wall. He broke Connor's wrist by twisting it. My sister's face went white, then flushed with anger. That's ridiculous. Connor told me himself it was an accident. Why would you say something like that? Because Connor is terrified of Derek, and he doesn't think you'll believe him. Because the injury pattern doesn't match a fall. Because I've spoken to other people who've been in Derek's life, and there's a pattern here you need to know about. Other people. You've been investigating my husband. Karen stood up abruptly. I can't believe this. I thought you were helping Connor recover, but instead you're trying to destroy my marriage. I'm trying to protect your son. No. She grabbed her jacket. I'm taking Connor home today, and I don't want you filling his head with paranoid accusations. She left before I could respond, walking out of the coffee shop with her head high and her hands trembling. When I got home, Connor was in the living room. He looked up with panic in his eyes. Mom called. She's coming to get me. She said you've been lying about Derek, that I need to tell her the truth about everything. What did you tell her? That I'd talk to her when she got here. Connor's voice was small. Uncle Bill, I can't go back there. Not yet. And that's when I realized we were out of time for careful documentation and building cases. We were at a crisis point. I called Greg Patterson again. I need options quickly. Karen is coming to take Connor home. He's afraid to go. I have evidence of a pattern, but nothing conclusive enough for legal intervention. Legally, your options are limited. She's his mother. She has custody. And if I refuse to let him go, I'm interfering with that custody. Exactly. Rock and hard place. Greg paused. There is one option, but it's nuclear. You file for emergency guardianship based on concerns for his safety. It triggers an immediate investigation, forces everything into the open, but it also declares war on your sister's marriage. Karen arrived an hour later. Derek was with her. I hadn't expected that, but I should have. Of course he'd want to be present, to control how things played out. Connor, Karen said, as soon as she entered. Get your things. We're going home. Connor looked at me, then at his mother. Mom, I need to tell you something, but I can't say it with him here. Derek has every right to be here. He's my husband and your stepfather. Karen's voice was strained, and apparently Uncle Bill has been spreading terrible accusations about him. They're not accusations. Connor stood up, and despite his injured wrist and the fear in his eyes, he looked remarkably like his father in that moment. Strong, determined. Mom, Derek pushed me against the wall and broke my wrist. He's been hurting me for months. And I've been too scared to tell you because I knew you wouldn't believe me. Dylan, that's not... Derek started, his voice full of hurt confusion. I'm not finished. Connor cut him off. He grabs me. He threatens me. He tells me all the ways he could ruin my life if I cause problems. And last week, when I said I wanted to go on the ski trip, he twisted my arm and threw me into the wall. The room was silent. Karen looked between her son and her husband, and I could see her world crumbling. That is absolutely not true. Derek's voice was carefully calibrated, just the right amount of shock and hurt. Karen, you know how Connor's been. Moody, oppositional. I've tried so hard to connect with him, to be patient, but apparently he'd rather make up stories than accept that I care about him. It's not just Connor, I said quietly. I pulled out my folder. This is medical documentation from another teenager about a year ago. Wrist injury, unexplained bruising. You were there that night too, Derek. With Isabel Moreau's daughter, Sophie. I watched Derek's expression flicker. Just for a second, but I saw it. I have no idea what you're talking about. And this is a statement from your ex-wife, Michelle, describing a pattern of controlling and aggressive behavior during your marriage, particularly toward her son. I placed each document on the coffee table, and this is Dr. Nguyen's detailed analysis of Connor's injuries, noting that they're inconsistent with a fall. Anyone can make allegations. Derek's voice had changed, harder now. This is a pathetic attempt to destroy my marriage because you've never accepted that Karen moved on from your dead brother-in-law. No, Karen's voice was barely a whisper. No, this is... She turned to Derek. Why didn't you tell me you dated Isabel Moreau? Her daughter goes to Connor's school. I've seen them at events. It was years ago. It didn't seem relevant. Derek's voice was smooth, but I could see tension in his shoulders. I want to talk to her. And to your ex-wife. That's ridiculous. You're going to listen to strangers over your own husband? Derek's mask was cracking. After everything I've done for you, I gave you stability, security. I took on your son, even though he's been nothing but hostile. And this is how you repay me? There it was, the real Derek Ashton, the one he'd kept hidden behind the charming smile and careful words. Karen took a step back, instinctively, moving closer to Connor. I think you should leave. I'm not leaving my own wife. I'm asking you to leave. Karen's voice trembled but held firm. I need time to think. Derek looked at each of us in turn. Karen, Connor, me. His expression cycled through hurt, anger, calculation, and finally settled on cold fury. You're making a mistake, a terrible mistake. And when you realize that, I might not be willing to forgive it. He left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. In the silence that followed, Karen sank onto the couch and started crying. Connor sat beside her, awkward with his cast, but trying to offer comfort. I'm sorry, she said over and over. I'm so sorry. I should have listened. I should have seen what was happening. Mom, it's okay. It's not okay. You're my son. My job is to protect you and I. She looked up at me with devastated eyes. Bill, I chose him over Connor. How do I come back from that? By choosing Connor now, I said gently. By acknowledging the mistake and doing better. That's all any of us can do. What followed was a long, painful process. Karen called Isabel Moreau and had a tearful conversation. She spoke with Michelle Reeves, who was remarkably kind given what Derek had put her family through. She sat with Connor and listened to months of incidents he'd been too afraid to share. By evening, Karen was emotionally drained but clear-eyed. "I'm filing for divorce, and I want to pursue charges, if that's an option." I called Greg Patterson, who walked us through the process. With multiple victims willing to come forward, with medical documentation, with a pattern established across Derek's relationships, we had something substantial. It wasn't simple. Derek fought the divorce viciously, trying to paint Karen as unstable and Connor as a troubled teen. But with Michelle and Isabel both willing to provide statements, with Sophie finally feeling safe enough to describe what Derek had done to her, the facade crumbled. The criminal case took months. Derek had good lawyers. But Dr. Nguyen's testimony about injury patterns, combined with statements from 3 teenagers, was devastating. In the end, Derek took a plea deal, assault charges, restraining orders, a criminal record that would follow him forever. It wasn't the justice Connor had hoped for. Derek didn't go to prison, but he lost his job, his reputation, and his carefully constructed life. More importantly, Connor was safe. 14 months later, I sat with my nephew at a cafe near the University of Calgary campus. He'd just finished his first semester of a kinesiology program, already talking about eventually becoming a physical therapist. "I got an email from Sophie," he said. "She's applying to universities now, wants to study psychology. She said to tell you thank you." "For what?" "For connecting the dots. She said if you hadn't figured out the pattern, she'd still be thinking she was the only one, that what happened was somehow her fault. She should thank Dr. Nguyen. She's the one who noticed. Mom wants you to come for Christmas dinner, by the way. She's making your favorite, tourtière." I smiled. Karen and I had worked hard to rebuild our relationship over the past year. There had been anger and hurt, difficult conversations about accountability and forgiveness. But we were family. We'd both loved Michael too much to let his memory be tarnished by permanent distance between us. "Tell her I'll be there." As I drove home that evening, I thought about that night Connor called me from the emergency department. How scared he'd been, how close we'd come to missing the signs, to letting Derek continue hurting kids who couldn't protect themselves. In my 3 decades as a firefighter, I'd responded to thousands of emergencies. I'd pulled people from burning buildings, freed them from crushed vehicles, held their hands while paramedics worked to save their lives. But something about this situation had stayed with me in a way most calls didn't. Maybe because it involved family. Maybe because Connor had trusted me enough to make that desperate call when he'd run out of other options. Or maybe because, unlike the emergencies I'd responded to during my career, this one didn't announce itself with alarms and obvious danger. This emergency had been quiet, hidden behind closed doors and pleasant facades, visible only to those who knew what to look for. These days, I volunteer with a program Greg Patterson helped establish, training teachers and healthcare workers to recognize the subtle signs of abuse, to document properly, to ask the right questions. Dr. Nguyen jokes that I'm more passionate about it than I ever was about firefighting. She might be right, because I learned something important from Connor's situation. The worst emergencies aren't always the ones that scream for attention. Sometimes they're the whispered phone calls at 1:30 in the morning from teenagers who've run out of options and just need someone to believe them. And if my years of experience can help make sure those calls get answered, that those quiet emergencies get the response they need, then maybe those 32 years of running toward danger meant exactly what they were supposed to mean. My phone buzzed with a text from Karen. "Christmas dinner confirmed. Connor's bringing his girlfriend. Can't wait to see you, big brother." I smiled and typed back, "Can't wait either. Love you." Outside my window, Calgary's skyline glittered against the Rocky Mountain foothills. Thousands of homes with thousands of stories. Some happy, some hiding desperate secrets. But somewhere in this city, maybe there was a kid who would remember Connor's story, who would find the courage to make that call, to ask for help. And somewhere, someone would answer. That thought, more than anything, helped me sleep well that night.